So welcome to the State House. Welcome to your house, the People's House. My name's Virginia Drew, and I'll be one of your tour guides.
And my name is Margaret Waterhouse, and we are very excited to bring you throughout the building today.
We look forward to showing you your State House inside and out. I'm really excited to be able to show you around our state capitol, to show you our wonderful building. Right now we're outside of the State House, and behind me is our building, the People's House. When you look at the State House, you can see it's gone through some changes over the last 200 years. Back in the day, it was just a two-story building. The second floor and the first floor were the only thing here, and there was no big portico. And that great big wonderful golden dome, that didn't come until in the midst of the Civil War. So we had a very modest building, but a building that has stood here for over 200 years. During the Civil War, our legislators realized that we needed a larger building, and we wanted to show that New Hampshire was here to stay. So they added on a third floor, and they put these big granite columns up front to make what we call the portico. And above that great giant dome was added to the top of our State House, where it has stood ever since. And when you visit, you can see that golden dome from miles away. On our lawn, we have some statues. We don't have a lot of statues, but the first statue that was ever placed on the front plaza of the State House was Daniel Webster. Webster was a great statesman, and he memorized the Constitution, he knew about our laws, and he represented New Hampshire extremely well in Washington, D.C. Webster also was a lawyer, and he took on some of the biggest issues of the day. We have John Stark. John Stark was a Revolutionary War hero who led at battles like Bunker Hill and Bennington. And John Stark is very famous for New Hampshire's state motto, "Live free or die, for death is not the greatest of evil." He was our second statue on the lawn. On the left is John Hale, Senator John Hale. I have to tell you, I had never heard of him when I first came to the State House. But now I have studied and learned so much about the great senator. John Parker Hale, his statue is here because he fought for rights of people, for all people. He was a great abolitionist, and he was one of the first U.S. senators to stand up in Washington, D.C. and say slavery is wrong, slavery must end. Those are the three statues right here on the plaza. But just outside, right guarding the gates, is New Hampshire's one and only president, Franklin Pierce. Franklin Pierce's statue was put up years later after he served in Washington, D.C., representing our great state. The large arch that many times people come through to enter the building is dedicated to New Hampshire's sailors and soldiers as a memory of all of those who have sacrificed for New Hampshire. So come on inside with me.
Welcome to the New Hampshire State House. We are now in the Memorial Hall of Flags.
Back in the day, this room was just a big, wide, open hall. The only thing in the room were these white columns. This room, long before it was called the Hall of Flags, was called Doric Hall. It is the room where for over 200 years, men and women have come into this building. They've walked past these wonderful Doric columns made out of solid New Hampshire pine on granite bases. The 8 columns in the center have been here all that time, but there are 2 imposters in the room. This is one of them, and if you knock, you'll hear the hollow tones. because these are plastic replicas, imposters in the hall. Those columns were actually added in 1969. This hall later, during the war, was where many of our soldiers came through to go to the Adjutant General's office, and they were issued battle flags, and the flags went off to war with our New Hampshire men. Today we call it the Hall of Flags, and it's a memorial hall dedicated to all of New Hampshire's men and later women who sacrificed their lives for us.
What was left of the flags came back here to this room. The flags have been in these cases for well over 100 years. In the Hall of Flags, we have 88 Civil War battle flags. Looking at the flags, you'll notice that some of them are not in great condition. Some of them are shredded and torn, but some of them are also in great condition. The flag bearer was in charge of keeping the flag held up high. This was their way of communication, because back then there was no cell phones or walkie-talkies. On top of the flags there are numbers, and these are the regiment numbers or the group numbers. And we have flags with the numbers 5, 2, and 12. These flags were all at the Battle of Gettysburg, the worst battle in America's history. We also have flags from World War I and World War II. You'll notice that these flags are in much better condition because at that time the flags were not carried out into the battlefield.
So New Hampshire's Hall of Flags is dedicated to New Hampshire's veterans and to those heroes who served. The Roll of Honor here lists the names of 697 men and women just from our small state who sacrificed for the people during World War I. Significant to note is the first woman to lose her life in sacrifice in the military. Her name was Anne Fraser Norton, a woman from New Hampshire, and her name is on that plaque. Below is our Congressional Medal of Honor recipients. Many of those names hail from the Civil War era, but there is an addition on that Roll of Honor. And Sergeant Ryan Pitts from New Hampshire had his name added in 2014. These were the bravest people who received the highest military honor there is.
Throughout the State House, we have over 200 paintings. Harriet Patience Dame was the first woman hung on the State House walls. Harriet Dame was a very brave woman, and she was a Civil War Army nurse. Harriet Dame would go out onto the battlefield to help wounded soldiers. She was a part of Regiment No. 2 during the Battle of Gettysburg. This is our Civil War mural. This shows the Battle of Gettysburg, Day 3. Looking at the painting, you'll notice the condition that the flags are in, and you'll see the scene that's happening. This is what happened at the Battle of Gettysburg.
We're now in the Great Hall, Representatives Hall. This room has gone through changes over the last 2 centuries. Back in the day, legislators sat on wooden benches, and today they have these cushy seats. But some of the things that have stayed the same for over 100 years are the paintings on the wall. The 5 large portraits on the wall have been there for over 100 years. You all probably recognize the portrait in the middle of the room, President George Washington. To his right is one of our most favored presidents of all time, Abraham Lincoln. I have to tell you that Abraham Lincoln's portrait is the newest portrait out of the 5 up here on the wall. In the 1920s, students just like you felt that we should have a painting of Abraham Lincoln on the walls of our State House. And so they did a fundraiser. They collected pennies because Abraham Lincoln is on the penny. Well, they raised enough money in pennies to raise over $2,000 to help bring this painting to the walls of the State House. Next to Lincoln is his very dear friend. We showed you his statue outside. It is John Parker Hale. John Hale also served in the House of Representatives in this room. He was a Speaker of the House and later did run for president against Franklin Pierce, whose portrait's over there. Franklin Pierce, like his friend John Hale, was also a Speaker of the House. Franklin Pierce was the youngest Speaker of the House ever in New Hampshire's history. He was only 26 years old when he was in charge of the New Hampshire legislature. And next to him is our dear friend, Daniel Webster. Daniel Webster never served in the New Hampshire state legislature, but he had such an impact on our state, and he memorized the Constitution and knew so much about our Constitution that he is known today as the defender of the Constitution. And what better person to have on the walls here in Representatives Hall. When you look around the room, you can see the lovely high ceiling, and right above us is that great golden dome that was added on during the Civil War.
The House will come to order. Members will please be seated.
Here in the House chamber, we have 400 state representatives. On a session day, the room will start filling up with our 400 members. To become a representative, you must be 18 years old and live in New Hampshire for 2 consecutive years. So in just a few more years, you can run for office and be passing laws here in the State House. Representatives have assigned seats, and the Speaker of the House will decide where they sit, kind of like how your teacher assigns your seat in school. Representatives only get paid $100 a year. Representatives don't work here for the money. They work here to make good decisions and pass laws for the people of New Hampshire. On the arm of the chair, there are numbers, and those numbers match up to the electronic voting box. The electronic voting box has 3 different buttons. The white button is the activation button, but also takes attendance, just like in school. The Speaker of the House has to know who is here and who is not. There are 3 different ways that representatives vote here in this room. Quite often they do a voice vote, but sometimes it's hard to decide if the yes or no was louder.
Question, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes, the chair's not sure. There'll be a division vote.
There are also division votes where they use the electronic voting buttons. There is a yes button and a no button. And on the scoreboards, it will appear how many people voted yes and how many people voted no. Electronic voting, representatives will only have 30 seconds to vote. And if you don't vote within that 30 seconds, the House clerk will call you out in front of everybody and ask what your vote is. Sometimes that can be a little bit embarrassing.
The House will be attentive to the state of the vote. With 217 members voting yea, 150 voting nay.
There's also a roll call vote, and on a roll call vote, the representative's name is attached to the vote, and you will find out how representatives voted. Up above is a balcony, and this is what we call the Visitors Gallery. The Visitors Gallery is open to the public, and you would be able to come in and watch your representatives voting. If you weren't able to make it, there is online streaming when it's convenient. We are now in the Senate chamber. This room has been in use for over 200 years. You'll notice that this room is much smaller, and that is because we have just 24 senators in New Hampshire. Senators also have assigned seats, and they sit by district, from District 1, who represents the North Country, all the way to District 24, down by the seacoast. To become a senator, you must be 30 years old and live in New Hampshire for 7 consecutive years. Senators represent a lot more people than representatives. They represent over 50,000 people, but per the Constitution, they actually get paid the same amount as representatives, $100 a year. The Senate President and the Speaker of the House, they get paid a little bit more money, $125 a year, but they have a lot more responsibility. This room is much different because senators also have desks and microphones. When the senators wish to speak, the senators actually have to get the attention of the Senate President. The senators raise their hands and go like this. And if the senators have a question, they raise their hand and draw a question mark. Here in the Senate, there is also 3 different ways to vote. There is a voice vote, just like in the House, but the division vote is different. All the yeses would stand up to be counted, and all the noes would stand up to be counted. For a roll call vote, the clerk will call out each senator by name and state if it's a yes vote or a no vote. Here in the Senate, we also have a visitors gallery. You'll notice that it's much smaller than the one that we have in the House chamber. But everyone is welcome. As long as we can fit you up there, you can come in and watch. Oftentimes, we have 4th graders that actually come in and kneel in front of all the guests.
When you come into the Senate chamber, one of the first things you usually notice are the beautiful murals on the wall. Those murals are really new to the Senate chamber. Back in the day, the room was very plain. White walls, a few paintings every once in a while, and the senators' tables. That was about it in the room. Later, in 1942, a wonderful artist named Barry Faulkner from Keene, New Hampshire, he painted these murals. They were painted on linen, they were painted on cloth at his home, and then brought to the State House and glued to the walls of the Senate, where they have been ever since the 1940s. So the Barry Faulkner murals, all 4 of them represent something that's important to New Hampshire. Here in this first mural is New Hampshire's last royal governor, John Wentworth, along with the Reverend Eliza Wheelock, and they're at the first graduation at Dartmouth College. And so that mural is to remind us the importance of education in New Hampshire. The next mural, well, here he is again, Daniel Webster. But in this mural, he's only about 9 years old. He's sitting on the floor of his parents' store in Salisbury. And before him is the United States Constitution. I mentioned Daniel Webster as the defender of the Constitution. Well, when he was in about 4th grade, he memorized the United States Constitution. The mural is to highlight our government and our Constitution. New Hampshire was the first state to create its own state constitution. The next mural, probably one of my favorite, shows a group of artists. Barry Faulkner painted himself into the mural with some of his artistic friends. The man sitting with the ducks in his lap, that is Abbott Thayer. Faulkner and Thayer developed the protective color theory. Today you know it as camouflage. In fact, this group of artists went to France during World War I, where they introduced their protective color theory. And that is why it's called that French name, camouflage. The mural on the end, there he is, John Stark, putting on his coat, ready to head out to battle during the Revolutionary War. One of New Hampshire's other firsts were, we were the first state to declare our independence from the British. And John Stark was one of our greatest leaders. In 1945, sitting in this room, lawmakers voted on our state motto. With John Stark's picture right there before him, one of the senators seated near here stood up and he said, "This should be our state motto, live free or die." The other senators all agreed with a loud, unanimous vote. They moved that bill onto the House where they also agreed. And that bill then made its final step, like all of our state bills do. Anything that wants to become a law has to be voted by the senators and representatives. But it doesn't become a law until it goes down the hall to the desk of the governor. And now we're on our way to the governor's office.
Here in the governor's reception area are the more recent paintings of governors. Looking at the paintings, you can see that the governors choose where they have their portrait done. Governor Judd Gregg has Mount Washington in the background. Governor Merrill has his painting with the gold dome in the background. Jean Shaheen's painting is done in the Executive Council chamber. Jean Shaheen was the first elected woman governor.
We're now in the Executive Council chamber. Here is where New Hampshire's governors have been working and meeting only since 1910, because our governor's office is located in what we call the new part of the building, only 110 years old. And around here, that makes it pretty new. On the walls are some of the earliest governors of New Hampshire, including those from England. Governor Burnett, Governor Belcher, and everyone's favorite over there, Governor Dudley. Those governors, we didn't elect those governors. They were sent here by the King of England to rule over New Hampshire. And when they ruled over New Hampshire, they did whatever they wanted. So they could choose all their friends to be judges. They could put all their friends, give them all the best jobs, and pay them whatever they wanted. Do you think the people of New Hampshire thought that was a good idea? Oh, no, they didn't. And so today in New Hampshire, we have another special piece of government. It's called the Executive Council. The people of your district, 1/5 of the state, actually elect an executive counselor also to represent them. So if our governor is from the North Country, he can't give all the jobs and all the appointments to people up north, or if they're from the Seacoast area, we have a counselor from that area. Every one of you has an executive counselor who represents your part of the state and the people who live near you. And this room is where the governor meets with his 5 executive counselors. The counselors actually sit in order of where they live, starting in District 1 up in the North Country and working our way around the state down to District 5 in the southwest corner. The governor sits at the head of the table. There are times when the governor uses this room to actually sign bills into law, and then we very often have many people in here. The day they signed the law for the potato bill, our state vegetable, the governor's table was surrounded by 4th graders. This room is also where the governor gives many of their speeches, and you sometimes will see that on television with the governor standing at the podium discussing things. Governor and council meet very much like the representatives do. They meet on a schedule, but if the governor wants anything to go forward with the executive branch, he needs a vote of these counselors. It makes it hard, but it also makes it so the governors make the best decisions for the people. We're the only state that do it this way. When the governor goes to sign bills into law, the check and balance has already happened because the senators and the representatives have represented us and voted for that. So to sign a bill into law, the governor can have a wonderful ceremony and do it right here, or he could actually go to the school or to the town where that bill was first brought up. One of the most famous bills for my 4th graders is the pumpkin bill. 4th graders from Harrisville, New Hampshire felt the pumpkin would make a great state symbol as our state official fruit of New Hampshire. That bill went before the House, where they voted yes. It went before the Senate, where they voted yes. And then it ended up on the desk of the governor. And the governor at that time realized those students had put so much work into this that he brought the bill with him to their very school and signed that bill into law right there. All the bills, whether it's something fun like a pumpkin bill or what should be our state beverage, or something really serious like protecting our people of our state, the bullying bill that 4th graders helped bring forward, they all go through the same process with the same serious weighing out of whether it's a good law or not.
We are now in the Visitor Center where we begin and end our tours.
This is the room where we welcome guests from all over the world, all over the country. And we even welcome presidential candidates to this room. but our most favorite people to welcome are New Hampshire school children.
We hope you enjoyed your tour, and we hope to see you someday soon.